The bullet was in the air for 2.7 seconds. In 2.7 seconds, it dropped 47 meters, the height of a 15-story building. It drifted 20 inches to the right. Pushed by wind, she'd measured by watching scrub brush bend at the halfway point, 900 meters away, through a scope dialed to a setting that no training range in the United States Army has ever required. At the other end of those 2.7 seconds, a man fell. Straight down. No está here. No clutch. Like someone had switched him off. 1,840 meters. One round. One kill. 12 soldiers who never knew they were 30 seconds from dying. The after-action report was 11 pages long. Single-spaced. Times New Roman. It described the patrol. It described the terrain. It described the mortar team, the tube, the base plate, the bag of rounds. It described the shot. It described the result. It mentioned the designated marksman 7 times. It mentioned her name 0 times. 6 weeks earlier, a lieutenant fresh from West Point had looked at the personnel roster in a briefing room at Fort Drum and said 5 words. Not loudly, not aggressively, just clearly enough for every officer in the room to hear. Who gave her a rifle? Her name was Ji-Yeon Holt, Sergeant, United States Army, Korean American, out of Fayetteville, North Carolina, daughter of a staff sergeant and an electrician. She'd been shooting since she was 12. She'd qualified designated marksman 2nd in a class of 24, beaten by 2 points out of 500 by a man with 3 deployments and 12 years on her. The lieutenant didn't request her, didn't want her, didn't speak to her directly for 42 days of combat patrol. And when she made a shot that exceeded her weapon's maximum effective range by a factor of 2.3, a shot the manual says is impossible, he wrote 11 pages about it and left her name out of every single one. The battalion commander read the report. He saw the range data. He picked up the phone. He said 4 words. Who made this shot? The document is 11 pages long. 11 pages of single-space times New Roman on white paper that has yellowed at the edges because it's been sitting in a filing cabinet at Fort Drum, New York, for 15 years. It's an after-action report, dated November 14th, 2009. Classified secret at the time of writing, downgraded to FOUO in 2014, fully declassified in 2019 under a routine review that nobody paid attention to because nobody pays attention to routine reviews. That's the point of making them routine. The report covers a patrol, a dismounted patrol in southern Helmand Province, Afghanistan. 12 soldiers, 3 hours, 1 engagement, 1 shot fired by friendly forces, 1 enemy Kia at a distance that the report lists as approximately 1,800 meters, which is wrong. The actual distance, measured later by a survey team using laser range-finding equipment, was 1,840 meters. The report rounds down. Reports always round down. Rounding down is what you do when you don't want a number to attract attention, when you want the number to slide past the reader's eye without snagging, without making someone stop and say, wait, that can't be right. 1,840 meters, 1.84 kilometers, 1.14 miles, 18 football fields laid end to end, the length of 36 Olympic swimming pools, a distance at which a human being is not a human being, is not a shape, not a silhouette, not even a smudge. At 1,840 meters, a human being is a theory, a mathematical proposition, a set of coordinates that you believe contains a person because your spotter tells you it does, because the math says it does, because the wind and the elevation and the temperature and the Coriolis effect and the rotation of the Earth itself have all been calculated and accounted for and fed into the equation. And the equation says, if you do everything right, everything, every variable, every correction, every breath held at exactly the right moment in exactly the right way, if you do all of that, then the bullet will arrive at those coordinates at the same time as the person you cannot see. That's what a shot at 1,840 meters is. It's not marksmanship. It's faith. Faith in physics. Faith in your equipment. Faith in your training. Faith in the person next to you who's looking through a spotting scope and telling you things you cannot verify with your own eyes. Faith that the world works the way the equations say it works, and that you, your hands, your lungs, your heartbeat, your trigger finger, that you are precise enough to be the mechanism through which the equation becomes reality. The report doesn't say any of this. The report says, at approximately 0947 local, the designated marksman engaged one enemy combatant at approximately 1,800 meters. The enemy combatant was confirmed Kia by observation. The engagement neutralized an imminent mortar threat to the patrol element. That's it. That's the sentence. 38 words for a thing that took 3 weeks of preparation and 90 seconds of execution, and that saved 12 lives. And that nobody in the chain of command, nobody in the battalion, nobody in the brigade would have believed was possible if it hadn't happened. And the sentence doesn't include a name. The designated marksman, not Sergeant Holt, not the shooter, not even she, the designated marksman. A role, a function, a billet on a roster, as if the shot fired itself, as if the rifle decided independently to send a round 1,840 meters across a valley in Helmand Province and put it through the chest of a Taliban mortar team leader who was 30 seconds away from dropping high explosive rounds on 12 American soldiers. The designated marksman. Her name was Ji-Yeon Holt, Sergeant, United States Army, MOS 11B, infantryman, designated marksman qualified, assigned to 2nd Platoon, Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 32nd Infantry Regiment, 3rd Brigade Combat Team, 10th Mountain Division. Out of Fort Drum, New York. Deployed to Helmand Province, Afghanistan, from August 2009 to March 2010. I'm going to tell you about her. I'm going to tell you about the shot. And I'm going to tell you about the 11-page report that doesn't say her name, and the lieutenant who wrote it, and the battalion commander who read it, and the question that started everything. 5 words spoken in a briefing room 6 weeks before the shot. 5 words that hung in the air like smoke from a cheap cigarette. 5 words that every person in that room heard, and that nobody challenged, and that Ji-Yeon Holt carried with her for the next 42 days until she answered them. With a single round from an M110 automatic sniper system at a distance that shouldn't have been possible. Who gave her a rifle? Ji-Yeon Holt was born in 1985 in Wjeongbu, South Korea, a city north of Seoul, close to the DMZ, close enough that her father, a Korean national who worked as a civilian contractor on Camp Red Cloud, could see the mountains of North Korea from the roof of his office building on clear days. Her mother was American, Staff Sergeant Patricia Holt, U.S. Army, military intelligence, stationed at Camp Red Cloud from 1983 to 1987. They met in 1984, married in 1985. Ji-Yeon was born 7 months later, which means the math doesn't quite work for a honeymoon baby, but nobody in the family has ever commented on the math, and I'm not going to be the one who starts. Patricia Holt, Patty, to everyone who knew her, was from Fayetteville, North Carolina. Army brat. Her father served. Her grandfather served. Her great uncle died at Chosin Reservoir in 1950, which is a fact that carries a particular weight when you're a Holt woman married to a Korean man and living 30 miles from the place where your great uncle froze to death fighting a war that technically never ended. The family didn't talk about it. The family didn't talk about a lot of things. The Holts were the kind of military family that communicates through service records and deployment patches and the things they don't say at Thanksgiving dinner. Ji-Yeon's father, Park Sung-ho, who took the name Samuel Park on his U.S. immigration paperwork in 1988, was an engineer. Electrical systems. He maintained generators and power infrastructure on the base. He was quiet in the way that Korean men of his generation were quiet, not passive, not weak but contained. He kept his opinions in a small space and his emotions in a smaller one, and he expressed love through acts of maintenance. Fixing things, building things, making sure the house worked, making sure the car started, making sure his daughter's bicycle chain was oiled and her school supplies were organized and her lunch was packed with exactly the right ratio of rice to banchan. They moved to the United States in 1988 when Patty's enlistment ended. Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Patty re-enlisted, got orders to Bragg, and Samuel found work as an electrician in Fayetteville. Ji-Yeon was 3. She doesn't remember Korea. She remembers Fayetteville, the flat, pine-covered landscape, the strip malls, the pawn shops and tattoo parlors that cluster around every military base like barnacles on a hull. The particular culture of a town that exists because of the Army and resents the Army for it and depends on the Army for everything and pretends it doesn't. She grew up between two cultures and belonging fully to neither. At home, her father spoke Korean. Her mother spoke English. Ji-Yeon spoke both, but Korean with an American accent and English with a slight hesitation on certain words. The hesitation of a brain that's running two operating systems simultaneously and occasionally needs a moment to switch between them. At school, she was the Asian girl, not Chinese, not Japanese, not any of the categories that American children in the 1990s had available for Asian faces. Just Asian, a monolith, a single word that erased the specificity of her father's country and her mother's choice and the particular history that had brought them together in a city 30 miles from a border that had killed 60,000 Americans 40 years earlier. She was not bullied. I want to be clear about that because the easy narrative here is the bullied child who grows up to prove everyone wrong. And that's not Ji-Yeon's story. She was not bullied because she was not the kind of child who gets bullied. She was tall for her age, 5'7" by 14, 5'9" by 16, and she was quiet in a way that read as self-contained rather than vulnerable. She had her father's stillness, the ability to be in a room without disturbing the air, the ability to watch without being watched. Teachers described her as observant. Classmates described her as weird. Neither description was wrong. She was good at two things in high school: math and shooting. The math is easy to explain. Her father was an engineer. Numbers were the family language, the one language that didn't require translation, that didn't carry cultural weight, that meant the same thing in Korean and English and every other language on earth. Ji-Yeon took AP Calculus as a junior and got a 5 on the exam. She took AP Statistics as a senior and got a 5 on that too. Her math teacher, a retired Army officer named Colonel Rhett Davidson, who taught at Terry Sanford High School because he loved math more than he loved retirement. Davidson told her she should study engineering. She said she'd think about it. She didn't think about it. She already knew what she was going to do. The shooting is harder to explain. Or maybe it's not. Maybe it's the simplest thing in the world. Her mother took her to the range when she was 12. Fort Bragg has a recreational shooting facility, open to active duty dependents retirees. Patty Holt had been shooting since she was 10. Her father had taught her. His father had taught him. It was a Holt thing, a family thing. The way some families play piano or build model trains or argue about politics at dinner. The Holt shot. They shot rifles and pistols and shotguns, and they shot well, and they shot often, and they didn't make a big deal about it, because making a big deal about things wasn't what Holtz did. Ji-Yeon's first time on the range. She fired a .22 rifle at a paper target at 25 meters. She put all 10 rounds inside the black circle. Her mother looked at the target, looked at her daughter, looked at the target again, said, "Huh, that was it, huh?" The whole version of a standing ovation. By 14, Ji-Yeon was shooting her mother's M9, the Beretta 9mm that Patty kept in a lockbox in the bedroom closet. By 16, she was shooting Patty's personal AR-15 at the outdoor range, putting rounds on steel at 300 meters with iron sights. By 17, she was competing in local matches, NRA high-power service rifle division, and placing the top 5 against men twice her age with equipment that cost 10 times what hers did. She didn't talk about it at school. She didn't bring trophies to class. She didn't wear shooting team t-shirts or put bumper stickers on her car. A 1994 Honda Civic that her father had bought for $600 and rebuilt the engine himself, because that's what Samuel Park did. He fixed things. The shooting was private. It was hers. It lived in the same quiet space where her father kept his emotions and her mother kept her opinions, and the Holt family kept everything that mattered. She graduated in 2003. She was 18. The country was at war, had been at war for 2 years, since the towers fell, since the world changed, since the particular machinery of American military response had been activated and pointed east and set in motion with a momentum that would not stop for 20 years. Her mother was deployed. Patty Holt, now a master sergeant, was in Iraq by March 2003, part of the initial invasion force. Her father was alone in a house in Fayetteville, going to work, coming home, eating dinner by himself, watching the news with the volume low because he couldn't stand the sound of the anchors' voices, but couldn't stop watching because his wife was somewhere in that footage. Somewhere in those dusty streets and burning buildings and long convoys of green vehicles moving through a landscape that looked nothing like Fayetteville and nothing like Wajongbu and nothing like anywhere he'd ever been. Ji-Yeon enlisted in June 2003. She walked into the recruiting station on Bragg Boulevard, the same street her mother had driven down 1,000 times, the same street where the pawn shops and the tattoo parlors and the check cashing places sat in a row like teeth in a broken jaw, and she told the recruiter she wanted infantry. The recruiter laughed, not cruelly, not dismissively. He laughed because it was 2003 and women could not serve in infantry. Could not. The policy was clear. Women could serve in support roles: logistics, intelligence, medical communications, administration. They could not serve in combat arms. They could not be infantry. They could not be armor. They could not be artillery. They could not be special forces. The doors were closed and locked, and the keys were in a drawer that nobody was opening. Not in 2003, not while the country was at war, and the Army had other things to worry about than whether an 18-year-old girl from Fayetteville wanted to carry a rifle for a living. Ji-Yeon didn't argue. She didn't make a speech. She didn't cite regulations or challenge the policy or threaten to call her congressman. She sat in the chair across from the recruiter's desk, and she said, "What's the closest I can get?" The recruiter, a sergeant first class named Bowman, who I tracked down in 2021, now retired, living in Clarksville, Tennessee, Bowman told me he remembered her because of that question. Not what can I do instead? Not what's available for women, but what's the closest I can get? As if infantry were a destination and she was willing to take a longer route, but not a different one. Bowman told her about military police, about Signal Corps, about military intelligence, which her mother had done, which was a path, which was proven. Ji-Yeon listened to all of it. Then she said, "Which one puts me closest to the fight?" Bowman said, "Honestly, am I? You'll be attached to combat units. You'll go where they go. You just want heavy MOS." She said, "Fine." She enlisted as a 35F intelligence analyst. Basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. AIT at Fort Huachuca, Arizona. She graduated both without distinction, not because she wasn't capable, but because she had learned from her mother and her father and the entire whole family tradition that distinction attracts attention, and attention attracts scrutiny, and scrutiny is the enemy of the quiet, competent, self-contained person who wants to do their job without being watched. She was assigned to Fort Drum, New York, 10th Mountain Division. She arrived in January 2004. She was 19 years old. She was a private first class. She was an intelligence analyst in a division that was deploying to Afghanistan in 6 months. And she was exactly where she wanted to be, close to the fight, close to the rifles, close to the thing she'd been moving towards since she was 12 years old, and put 10 rounds inside a black circle and heard her mother say, "Huh." Her first deployment was 2004 to 2005. Afghanistan, Bagram Airfield. Initially, then forward deployed to a small outpost in Paktia Province. She worked in the S2 shop, the intelligence section, analyzing reports, building target packages, briefing patrol leaders on threat assessments. She was good at it. She was good at it the way her father was good at electrical systems, methodically, precisely, without flash or drama. She read reports the way her father read wiring diagrams, looking for the pattern, the connection, the thing that didn't fit. But she wasn't satisfied. She was close to the fight, but not in it. She briefed patrols, but didn't go on them. She analyzed threats, but didn't face them. She was behind the wire, inside the TOC, looking at screens and maps and photographs, while other soldiers with different MOS codes, soldiers with rifles and body armor, and the particular weight of a combat load on their shoulders, went outside and did the thing she'd enlisted to do. In 2006, between deployments, she did something unusual. She requested and received permission to attend the designated Marksman course. This was not standard for an intelligence analyst. The designated Marksman course was designed for infantrymen, 11B soldiers who would carry the M110 SAS or the M14 EBR as their platoon's precision shooter. It was a combat arms course for combat arms soldiers, and Ji-Yeon Holt was neither. But the Army in 2006 was a flexible institution in ways it hadn't been before the war. The wars, plural, Iraq and Afghanistan simultaneously, had stretched the force thin. Units were deploying with gaps in their rosters. Billets went unfilled. Capabilities went unmet. And commanders, faced with the choice between having no designated marksman and having a designated marksman who happened to be female and happened to have an intelligence MOS, were increasingly choosing the latter. Her battalion commander at the time, a lieutenant colonel named Reeves, who I was unable to reach, approved the request. Her company commander signed off. She went to the course at Fort Benning in the summer of 2006. 3 weeks. She was the only woman in a class of 24. She graduated second in the class. The soldier who beat her, a staff sergeant from the 82nd Airborne with 3 deployments and 12 years of experience, beat her by 2 points on the final qualification. 2 points out of 500. She returned to Fort Drum with a designated marksman qualification and an M110 SAS assigned to her name. She was 21 years old. She was a specialist E4. She was an intelligence analyst who could shoot better than most infantrymen in her battalion. And the battalion knew it, and the battalion didn't know what to do with it. Her second deployment was 2007 to 2008. Afghanistan again. This time she went out on patrols, not as an intelligence analyst sitting in the TOC, as a designated marksman attached to an infantry platoon. She carried the M110. She wore the same body armor. She walked the same roads. She faced the same IEDs and the same ambushes and the same grinding, daily uncertainty of a war that had no front lines and no safe areas and no way to tell the difference between a farmer and a fighter until one of them started shooting. She fired her weapon in combat for the first time on March 3rd, 2008. A patrol in Wardak Province. Contact from a tree line at 400 meters. She engaged 2 targets. 1 confirmed hit. The patrol broke contact without casualties. Her platoon leader, a first lieutenant whose name I have but won't use because he's still serving, wrote in his patrol report, DM engaged effectively at range. No friendly casualties. DM, designated marksman. Not Holt. Not specialist Holt. Not even she. DM. The pattern was already forming. The pattern of erasure. The pattern of turning a person into a function, a name into an acronym, a woman into a role that could have been filled by anyone and therefore was filled by no one in particular. She came home from that deployment with a combat action badge and an Army Commendation Medal and a reputation that traveled through the NCO network the way reputations do. Quietly, informally, through conversations in motor pools and smoking areas, and the particular grapevine that connects soldiers who've served together and soldiers who've served with soldiers who've served together. The reputation was simple. Holt can shoot. That's all. 3 words. But in the Army, 3 words is enough. 3 words is a career. In 2008, she did something else unusual. She reclassified, changed her MOS, from 35F, intelligence analyst, to 11B, infantryman. This was possible because of a policy change that had been quietly implemented in 2007, allowing certain female soldiers in certain units to reclassify in a combat arms MOSs under specific conditions. The conditions were narrow. The paperwork was extensive. The approval chain was long. But Ji-Yeon Holt had a battalion commander who wanted her in his formation, and a company commander who'd seen her shoot, and a platoon leader who'd watched her perform under fire. And between the 3 of them, they pushed the paperwork through. She became officially an infantryman. Mos 11B, one of the first women in the United States Army to hold that MOS through reclassification rather than initial entry. She was 23 years old. She was a sergeant. She'd been promoted in 2008 meritoriously on the strength of her deployment performance. She was assigned to 2nd Platoon, Alpha Company 1 to 32 Infantry, and she was carrying an M110 SAS. And she was going back to Afghanistan in August 2009, and she was going to a place called Helmand Province, where the Taliban were strong and the terrain was brutal and the distances were long, and the war was about to get worse before it got better. And that's where the lieutenant comes in. 2nd Lieutenant Marcus Dwyer, United States Army, Infantry, Class of 2009, United States Military Academy at West Point. 22 years old, from Greenwich, Connecticut, the Greenwich of hedge fund managers and country clubs and houses that cost more than most soldiers will earn a lifetime. His father was a partner at a law firm in Manhattan. His mother was on the board of 3 nonprofits. His older brother was at Goldman Sachs. Marcus was the family's military project, the one who chose service over finance, who chose West Point over Yale, who chose the infantry over the JAG Corps, and who arrived at Fort Drum in June 2009 with a gold bar on his chest and a Ranger tab on his shoulder and the absolute, unshakable confidence of a young man who has never been wrong about anything because he has never been in a situation where being wrong had consequences. I want to be fair to Dwyer. I want to be fair the way I was fair to Pruitt in the last story. Because fairness matters, because complexity matters, because the easy thing is to make him a villain and the true thing is to make him a person. Marcus Dwyer was not a bad officer. He was not incompetent. He was not cruel. He was young. He was inexperienced. He was the product of an institution, West Point, that teaches leadership as a set of principles and then sends its graduates into a world where principles collide with reality and the collision is never clean. He arrived at Alpha Company in June. He was assigned to 2nd Platoon. His platoon sergeant was Sergeant First Class Robert Kong, a Korean-American NCO with 3 deployments and 14 years of service, who I'll tell you more about later because Kong matters in this story in ways that aren't immediately obvious. His squad leaders were experienced. His team leaders were experienced. His soldiers were experienced. Everyone in 2nd Platoon had at least 1 deployment. Most had 2. Some had 3. Dwyer had 0. This is the fundamental tension of the American military's officer system. A 22-year-old lieutenant with a degree and a tab and 0 combat experience is placed in command of 30 soldiers who have, collectively, more time in combat than he has time on Earth. The system works. It has worked for 250 years because of the NCO Corps, because the Sergeant First Class and the staff sergeants and the sergeants know what they're doing and they guide the lieutenant and they protect the lieutenant, and they let the lieutenant make decisions while quietly ensuring that the decisions don't kill anyone. But the system requires one thing from the lieutenant: humility, the willingness to listen, the willingness to say, "I don't know, and what do you think?" and "Sergeant, I need your help." The willingness to be new, the willingness to be wrong, the willingness to learn from people who don't have degrees and don't have tabs and don't have gold bars, but who have something more valuable than all of those things combined, which is the experience of having been shot at and having survived it. Dwyer had the tab. He had the degree. He had the gold bar. He did not have the humility. I don't say this to condemn him. I say this because it's what happened. Because 4 people told me independently that Lieutenant Dwyer arrived at 2nd Platoon with a plan for how things would work and a resistance to any information that contradicted the plan. He had studied counterinsurgency at West Point. He had read the manuals. He had written papers. He knew, theoretically, how a platoon should operate in Afghanistan. The patrol schedules, the engagement protocols, the rules of engagement, the relationship between kinetic operations and population-centric strategy. He knew all of it. In theory, what he didn't know, what he couldn't know, because you can't know it until you've lived it, was what it feels like when a theory meets the dust, when the manual meets the IED, when the engagement protocol meets a 14-year-old boy with an AK-47 who doesn't know he's supposed to be a non-combatant, when the plan meets the mountain and the mountain doesn't move. He met Ji-Yeon Holt on his 3rd day at Fort Drum. The platoon was conducting pre-deployment training, ranges, land navigation, medical lanes, the full cycle preparation that a unit goes through before it deploys. Dwyer was observing, learning faces, learning names, building the mental map of his platoon that every new lieutenant builds in the first week. Who's strong? Who's weak? who's reliable, who's a problem, who needs watching, who could be trusted. He saw Holt on the range. She was firing the M110 at the 1,000-meter line, a distance that most soldiers never shoot at, a distance reserved for snipers and designated marksmen, and the particular breed of shooter who finds satisfaction in making steel ring at ranges where the target is barely visible to the naked eye. She was hitting, consistently, round after round, the distant clang of bullet on steel arriving a full second after the shot, the sound traveling slower than the bullet, the confirmation always arriving late, like an echo from the future. Dwyer watched. He didn't say anything. Not then. He watched her shoot, and he watched her clean her weapon, and he watched her walk back to the platoon area with the M110 slung across her back, and he filed the information away in whatever mental category he had for things that didn't fit his plan. The briefing happened 6 weeks before deployment. August 2009. The company was in a conference room at Fort Drum, a beige room with fluorescent lights and a projector screen and folding chairs and the particular smell of military briefing rooms everywhere, which is coffee and dry erase markers and the faint chemical sweetness of floor wax. The company commander, Captain Elijah Torres, a man I'll tell you about, was briefing the platoon leaders on their personnel rosters. Who was going? Who was staying? Who was attached? Who was detached? Torres got a second platoon. He went through the roster. Squad leaders, team leaders, medic, RTO, forward observer, and then designated marksman, Sergeant Holt. Dwyer looked up from his notebook. He looked at Torres. He looked at the roster projected on the screen. And he said, not loudly, not aggressively, but clearly enough for everyone in the room to hear, he said, "Who gave her a rifle?" "Calls." She talked about range estimation and target identification and the particular challenges of distinguishing a farmer with a shovel from a fighter with an RPG at 600 meters through a 12-power scope. She talked about her job. Only her job. Always her job. The other soldiers in the platoon, the infantrymen, the squad leaders, the team leaders, they adjusted. Not immediately. Not all of them. But over 3 weeks of patrols, 3 weeks of shared danger, 3 weeks of watching Holt do her job with the quiet competence that was her inheritance and her armor. Over 3 weeks, most of them adjusted. They stopped seeing the female and started seeing the DM, which was, ironically, exactly what Dwyer had been calling her all along. But when the soldiers said it, they meant it differently. They meant it as an acknowledgement of function. When Dwyer said it, he meant it as a denial of personhood. The difference is everything. The difference is the entire story. October 23rd, 2009. Day 42. I'm going to slow down now. I'm going to give you this day the way it happened. Not compressed, not summarized, not reduced to a sentence in an after-action report. I'm going to give you the hours and the minutes and the seconds because the seconds matter. Because at 1,840 meters, a second is the difference between a hit and a miss. Because at 1,840 meters, the bullet is in the air for almost 3 seconds. And in those 3 seconds, the world can change. The wind can shift, the target can move, the earth can rotate enough to push the bullet 4 inches to the right. And the shooter has to account for all of it before the trigger breaks. Before the bullet leaves. Before the 3 seconds begin. 5:30 dawn. Patrol base Karma. The sky is the color of a bruise. Purple and yellow at the horizon. Dark blue overhead. The stars still visible in the west. The temperature is 42 degrees Fahrenheit. It will be 78 by noon. This matters. Temperature affects air density. Air density affects bullet flight. A bullet fired in cold air behaves differently than a bullet fired in warm air, and a bullet fired in air that is warming, that is transitioning from cold to warm over the course of a morning, behaves differently still. The shooter has to know this, has to feel it, has to adjust. Holt is awake. She's been awake since 0500. She's in the small plywood structure that serves as the platoon's operations center, a room the size of a walk-in closet, with a map table and a radio and a whiteboard with the day's patrol schedule written in blue dry erase marker. She's studying the map, not for the first time, not for the 10th time. She's studied this map every morning for 42 days, and every morning she looks for the thing she hasn't seen yet, the pattern she's missed, the dead ground she hasn't accounted for, the position that the Taliban might use that she hasn't identified. Today's patrol is a dismounted movement to the south. 12 soldiers. Route: south along the canal road for 2 kilometers, then east through a series of compounds to an overwatch position on a low ridge, a ridge that rises maybe 30 meters above the valley floor. Not dramatic, not imposing, but enough to give observation over the flat terrain to the south and east. The purpose of the patrol is observation. Watch, report, identify patterns of life. Determine whether the compounds to the south are occupied by civilians or fighters or both. Holt will be on the ridge. That's her position. The overwatch. The eye. She'll set up the M110 on its bipod, and she'll glass the terrain through her scope, and she'll watch, and she'll wait, and she'll be ready for the thing that might not come, but that she has to be ready for anyway, because readiness is the job. Readiness is always the job. 6:30, the patrol departs. 12 soldiers in a file, spaced 10 meters apart, moving south along the canal road. The canal is dry. It's October. The irrigation season is over. The water has been diverted upstream. The canal bed is cracked mud, pale gray, the texture of old skin. The road beside it is packed dirt, rutted by the wheels of jingle trucks and donkey carts and the occasional Toyota Hilux that serves as both civilian transport and Taliban technical, depending on the day and the driver and the contents of the truck bed. The wire is at the front, behind the point man, ahead of the RTO. This is where lieutenants walk, close to the radio, close to the front, visible. Dwyer is a good patrol leader in the mechanical sense. He moves at the right pace, he maintains the right intervals, he checks his map at the right times. He does everything the manual says to do. The manual doesn't say anything about talking to your designated marksman, so he doesn't. Holt is 6th in the file, middle of the patrol. She carries the M110 in her hands. Not slung, never slung on patrol. The rifle is always in her hands. Ready. The weight of it, 11 pounds unloaded, 13 with the scope and the suppressor in the magazine, is distributed across her arms and her shoulders and her core, and she carries it the way her mother carried her M16 in Iraq, the way her great-uncle carried his M1 Garand at Chosen, the way Holt have always carried rifles, like they belong there. Like the rifle is not a burden, but an extension. Like the weight is not weight, but purpose. 7:15, the patrol reaches the ridge. It's not much, a spine of rock and hard-packed earth that rises from the valley floor like the back of a buried animal. Scrub brush. A few rocks large enough to provide cover. A view to the south and east that extends for kilometers, flat brown, featureless except for the compounds and the tree lines and the irrigation ditches that break the landscape into a grid of potential cover and potential threat. Holt moves to her position. She's identified it on the map. A slight depression behind a rock outcropping on the eastern face of the ridge. Good cover, good concealment, good field of fire to the south and southeast. She sets up the M110, bipod extended. Scope caps off. Rear bag positioned under the stock. She lies prone, flat on her stomach, legs spread slightly for stability, her body forming a triangle with the rifle at the apex. She adjusts the scope. 12 power. She begins to glass. The rest of the patrol sets up around the ridge. Security positions. Observation posts. Dwyer is on the western side with the RTO, talking to the company TOC on the radio, reporting their position, confirming their timeline. Kong is moving between positions, checking fields of fire, adjusting soldiers, doing the quiet work of a platoon sergeant that looks like nothing and is everything. Kong stops at Holt's position. He doesn't speak. He looks at her setup. He looks at her field of fire. He nods. He moves on. This is their communication. This has been their communication for 42 days. A look, a nod, an understanding that doesn't require words because words are noise and noise is the enemy of the thing they're both trying to do, which is keep 32 people alive in a place that is actively trying to kill them. 800 nothing. The terrain is empty. The compounds to the south show no movement. The tree lines are still. The irrigation ditches are dry and silent. The morning is warming, 55 degrees now, climbing. The heat mirage is beginning, a faint shimmer at the base of the compounds, the air bending light the way water bends a stick, making the straight lines of the walls waver and dance. 801 nothing. Holt glasses methodically, left to right, near to far. She's looking for anomalies. A door that was closed yesterday and is open today. A vehicle that wasn't there before. A person moving in a pattern that doesn't match civilian behavior. Too fast, too purposeful, too aware of sight lines and cover. 802 nothing. The sun is higher. The temperature is 62 degrees. The mirage is stronger. Through the scope, the distant compounds look like they're underwater, rippling, distorting, the edges blurring and reforming. Holt adjusts her position. She drinks water from her camelback. She doesn't take her eye from the scope for more than 30 seconds at a time. 803. Movement. South-southeast. Range. Approximately 1,800 meters. Holt sees it in the scope. A flicker of motion behind a compound wall. Not a person. Not yet. A shadow. A change in the pattern of light and dark that tells her something has moved in a space where nothing was moving before. She keys her radio. Low voice. Calm. Kilo 2, this is DM. I have movement. South-southeast, 1,800 meters. Behind the compound with the blue door. Stand by. Kang's voice comes back. Roger. Keep eyes on. She keeps eyes on. The movement resolves. A figure. Then 2 figures. Then 3. They emerge from behind the compound wall. Not walking casually, not moving like farmers or shopkeepers or civilians going about their day. Moving with purpose. Moving with the particular body language of men who are carrying something heavy and who know they're being watched and who are trying to minimize their exposure. They're carrying a tube, a metal tube, about 4 feet long, and a base plate, and a bipod assembly, and a bag, a canvas bag that sags with the weight of its contents, which are cylindrical and heavy and which Holt recognizes immediately because she studied every weapon system in the Taliban's arsenal, and she knows what mortar rounds look like even when they're in a bag, and even when they're 1,800 meters away, and even when the heat mirage is making everything shimmer and dance. It's a mortar team, 82 millimeters, setting up behind the compound wall, using the wall as concealment from the ridge, from her position, from the place where 12 American soldiers are sitting in the open on a spine of rock that offers observation, but not protection from indirect fire. She keys the radio again. Kilo, 2. DM, positive ID on mortar team. 3 personnel, 82 Mike, setting up behind blue door compound. Range, she pauses. Checks her scope. Checks her range card. Checks the laser rangefinder that's mounted on a small tripod beside her. The number comes back, 1,840. Range 1840 meters. Silence on the radio. 2 seconds. 3. Then Kang's voice. Say again, range. 1840. Confirmed. Another pause. Then Kong. Standby. She hears Kong moving. Hears the crunch of gravel. Hears voices, Kong and Dwyer, talking. She can't hear the words. She doesn't need to. She knows what the conversation is. She knows because the M110's maximum effective range is listed in the manual as 800 meters. 800, not 1800, not even close. The shot she's looking at is more than twice the weapon's rated capability. It's a shot that the manual says is impossible. It's a shot that no training scenario accounts for. It's a shot that exists in the space between what the equipment is designed to do and what the equipment can do in the hands of someone who has spent 3 years learning its limits and then learning to exceed them. Kong comes on the radio. DM, Kilo, 2 actual wants to know. Can you make that shot? Kilo 2 actual. Dwyer, the lieutenant, asking, through Kong, not directly, never directly, whether his designated marksman can do the thing that needs to be done. Holt doesn't hesitate. She doesn't calculate. She's already calculated. She calculated the moment the rangefinder returned 1,840. She calculated wind, left to right, 6 to 8 miles per hour, based on the movement of the scrub brush at the midpoint between her position and the target. She calculated temperature, 64 degrees now, air density adjusted. She calculated elevation. She's 30 meters above the valley floor. The target is at valley level. The angle is negligible at this distance, but she accounts for it anyway. She calculated the Coriolis effect, the rotation of the Earth, which at 1,840 meters will push the bullet approximately 3 inches to the right. She calculated bullet drop. At 1,840 meters, the 175-grain Sierra Match King round from the M110 will drop approximately 47 meters from a bore line. 47 meters, the height of a 15-story building. She has to aim 47 meters above her target to hit it. She has to point the rifle at empty sky and trust that gravity and velocity and distance will conspire to bring the bullet down to the exact point where a man is standing. She's already calculated all of this. She calculated it in the time it took Kong to walk to Dwyer and back. She calculated it the way her father calculates voltage drops and resistance values. Automatically, instinctively, the math living in her body the way music lives in a pianist's fingers. She keys the radio. Affirmative. I can make the shot. Pause. Then calm. You have clearance to engage. 1 round. Confirm target before firing. Roger. Engaging. She settles. This is the moment. Not the trigger pull. That comes later. This is the moment. The settling. The becoming still. The transition from a person who is thinking to a person who is not thinking, who is only breathing, only feeling, only existing in the narrow space between the scope and the target and the wind and the math and the 3 seconds that the bullet will spend in the air between her muzzle and his chest. She adjusts the scope, dials the elevation turret up. 47 meters of drop means she's dialing the scope to a setting that no training range has ever required, a setting that exists on the turret because the engineers who designed the scope accounted for distances that the engineers who designed the rifle said were impossible. The scope knows something the rifle doesn't. The scope knows that impossible is a word for people who haven't done the math. She adjusts for wind. Left to right, 7 miles per hour. She's split the difference between 6 and 8 because the wind at the midpoint is not the wind at her position and not the wind at the target, and the only honest answer is the average, and the average is 7. She dials the windage turret. Right? For clicks. Each click moves the point of impact 1/4 of a minute of angle at 100 meters. At 1,840 meters, each click moves the point of impact approximately 13 centimeters. For clicks, 52 centimeters, 20 inches of wind correction. She's aiming 20 inches to the left of where she wants the bullet to land, trusting the wind to push it right, trusting the math, trusting the physics, trusting everything except the part of her brain that's saying, this is too far. This can't work. Nobody makes this shot. She ignores that part. She's been ignoring that part her whole life. The part that says, you can't. The part that says, who gave her a rifle? The part that says, the manual says 800 meters. The part that says, you're a woman and this is a man's weapon and this is a man's war and this is a man's shot and you don't belong here. She ignores all of it. She breathes, in through the nose, out through the mouth. She finds a natural respiratory pause, the moment between exhale and inhale where the body is still, where the chest is not moving, where the crosshairs are not rising and falling with the breath, but are fixed, steady, motionless on the point of aim. The mortar team leader is standing behind the compound wall. He's directing the other two, pointing, gesturing, telling them where to position the base plate, where to set the bipod, where to stack the rounds. He's standing still. For this moment, this one moment, he's standing still. 947. She presses the trigger. Not pulls, not squeezes. Presses. The distinction matters. Pulling introduces lateral movement. Squeezing implies effort. Pressing is neutral. Pressing is the application of force without direction, without intention, without anything except the slow, steady increase of pressure until the sear breaks and the firing pin falls and the primer ignites and the powder burns and the bullet begins its journey. The M110 fires. The sound is, she doesn't hear it. Not really. Not in the moment. The suppressor reduces it to a sharp crack, a contained explosion, a sound that's over before it begins. The recoil pushes the rifle back in her shoulder, firm, controlled, the buffer spring absorbing the energy and returning the bolt forward and chambering the next round, which she won't need. The bullet leaves the muzzle at 2,580 feet per second. It's a 175-grain Sierra Match King, a boat-tail hollow point designed for accuracy at extreme range. It spins at 198,000 revolutions per minute, stabilized by the rifling in the barrel, gyroscopically locked on its axis like a tiny planet orbiting nothing. It flies. For 2.7 seconds, it flies. It rises, climbing above the bore line, arcing upward against gravity, reaching its apex somewhere around the 900-meter mark, 47 meters above the straight line between the muzzle and the target. Then it falls. Gravity pulls it down. The air slows it. The wind pushes it right. Exactly as much as she calculated, exactly 20 inches, exactly 4 clicks of windage correction translated into lateral movement across 1,840 meters of Afghan air. 2.7 seconds. In 2.7 seconds, Ji-Yeon Holt breathes once. She keeps her eye on the scope. She watches. She can't see the bullet. Nobody can see a bullet in flight. Not at any distance, not with any optic. She can only wait. Wait for the 2.7 seconds to pass. Wait for the math to resolve. Wait for the equation to produce its answer. The mortar team leader drops. She sees it through the scope. At 12 power, at 1,840 meters, a human being is small, maybe 2 inches tall in the scope picture. But she sees the movement, the sudden, boneless collapse, the way a body falls when the thing that was holding it up, the nervous system, the muscle tension, the electrical impulse of life is interrupted. He doesn't stagger. He doesn't clutch his chest. He drops, straight down, like a puppet whose strings have been cut simultaneously. The other two figures freeze. For 1 second. Then they run. They leave the mortar tube. They leave the base plate. They leave the bag of rounds. They run north, behind a compound, out of her sight line, gone. Holt keys the radio. Her voice is the same tone, the same cadence, the same flat, calm, informational delivery that she's used for every radio call for 42 days. Kilo 2, DM, target down. 1 EKIA. Remaining personnel have fled north. Mortar position is abandoned. Equipment in place. Silence. 3 seconds. 4. Then Kang's voice. Roger. Good copy. Stand by. She stands by. She keeps her eye on the scope. She watches the compound. She watches the body. She watches the abandoned mortar tube and the base plate and the bag of rounds that will never be fired at her ridge, at her patrol, at the 12 soldiers who are alive, because a 175-grain bullet traveled 1,840 meters in 2.7 seconds and arrived at the exact coordinates where a man was standing. She doesn't move. She doesn't celebrate. She doesn't pump her fist or say, "Got him," or do any of the things that movies show shooters doing after a kill. She lies prone behind her rifle, and she watches, and she breathes, and she waits for the next thing, because there's always a next thing, and the next thing might require another shot, and if it does, she'll be ready. The next thing doesn't come. The mortar team is gone. The threat is neutralized. The patrol continues its observation mission for another 2 hours and then returns to patrol base Karma without incident. 12 soldiers, all 12, walking back along the canal road in the afternoon heat, the temperature now 76 degrees, the mirage now thick and shimmering, the landscape looking like it's melting at the edges. Nobody says anything to Holt on the walk back. Not congratulations. Not good shot. Not you saved our lives. Nobody says anything because nobody knows what to say. Because what she did exists outside the vocabulary that the platoon has developed for talking about combat. They have words for firefights, contact, TSC, troops in contact. They have words for IEDs, strike, find, clear. They don't have words for what Holt did. They don't have a category for it. A single shot at a distance that shouldn't be possible, fired by a person who shouldn't be here, saving lives that didn't know they needed saving until after they were saved. Kong walks beside her for the last 500 meters. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. His presence beside her is the statement. His presence says, "I saw. I know. It counts." Dwyer is at the front of the patrol. He doesn't turn around. He doesn't look back. He walks with his eyes forward and his radio handset pressed to his ear and his notebook in his hand, and he doesn't look at the sixth person in the file, the person with the M110, the person who just did the thing that he asked if she could do and that she said yes, and that she did. He doesn't look back. The after-action report was due within 72 hours. That's standard. Every significant engagement generates paperwork. The Army runs on paperwork the way an engine runs on fuel. And without it, nothing moves, nothing is recorded, nothing becomes official. An engagement without a report is an engagement that didn't happen. A kill without documentation is a kill that doesn't exist. The bureaucracy doesn't care what you did. The bureaucracy cares what you wrote down. Dwyer wrote the report. That's the platoon leader's job. The PL writes the AR. The platoon sergeant reviews it. The company commander approves it. And it goes into the filing system where it will sit for years, decades, until someone pulls it out for a historical review or a lessons learned study or a journalist with a FOIA request and too much time on his hands. Dwyer wrote 11 pages. 11 pages of single space times New Roman. He described the patrol route. He described the terrain. He described the observation position on the ridge. He described the identification of the mortar team, the tube, the base plate, the rounds, the 3 personnel. He described the engagement decision. He described the shot. He described the result. He described the return to base. 11 pages. And in 11 pages, the name Holt appears 0 times. 0. I've read the report. I have a copy. I obtained it through a FOIA request in 2020 after it was declassified. I've read it 3 times. I've searched it electronically. Control F, Holt, 0 results. Control F, Ji-Yeon, 0 results. Control F, Sergeant, 14 results, none of them referring to her. Control F, she, 0 results. Control F, her, 0 results. The report refers to the designated marksman 7 times. 7 times in 11 pages. The designated marksman identified the threat. The designated marksman requested clearance to engage. The designated marksman fired 1 round. The designated marksman confirmed the kill. 7 references to a function. 0 references to a person. I want you to understand what this means. I want you to understand it not as an oversight, because it's not an oversight. You don't write 11 pages and accidentally omit the name of the person who made the shot that the entire report is about. I want you to understand it as a decision. A deliberate, conscious, purposeful decision to write a human being out of her own story. To take the most significant thing she did in 5 years of service, the thing that saved 12 lives, the thing that exceeded the weapon's rated capability by a factor of 2.3, the thing that would have been written up for an award if it had been done by anyone else in that platoon, and to reduce it to a pronoun. Not even a pronoun. A noun phrase. The designated marksman. 3 words that contain no gender, no name, no identity, no humanity. Kong reviewed the report. That's his job. The platoon sergeant reviews the PL's work before it goes up. Kong read 11 pages. Kong saw the absence. Kong made a decision. He told me about this decision. 12 years later, at that Korean restaurant in Fayetteville, over bibimbap and soju, he told me what he did and what he didn't do and why. He said, I thought about pushing back. I thought about telling the LT to put her name in. I thought about going to the CEO and saying, Sir, this report is incomplete. I thought about all of it. I said, what did you do? He said, I signed it. I'll let it go up. I said, why? He said, and he put his chopsticks down when he said this, which is how I knew it mattered to him, because Kong is a man who eats while he talks and talks while he eats, and the only time he stops eating is when the words require his full attention. He said, because I knew it would get caught. I knew someone above us would read that range data and ask questions. And I wanted the questions to come from above. Not from me. Not from her. From above. Because when it comes from above, the LT can't bury it. When it comes from me, he can say I'm being insubordinate. When it comes from her, he can say she's being emotional. But when it comes from a battalion commander, when the BC reads 1,800 meters and says, who the fuck made that shot? The LT has to answer. And the answer has a name. Kong was right. The report went up. Company commander signed it. Captain Torres, who read it, who noticed the absence, who made his own decision not to send it back. Torres told me, briefly, over the phone, he didn't want to talk long. Torres told me he saw what Dwyer did, and he let it go because I wanted to see what battalion would do. I wanted to see if the system would correct itself. The system. That word again. The system. As if the system is a thing that acts independently of the people who comprise it. As if the system has agency. As if the system can correct itself without someone, a specific person with a name and a rank and a decision to make, choosing to correct it. The report reached battalion. It sat in a stack of reports on the S3's desk for 4 days. The S3, the operations officer, a major, read it as part of his daily review of significant activities. He flagged it, not for the missing name, for the range. He circled approximately 1,800 meters in red pen and wrote in the margin, "Verify. This exceeds M110 effective range." The flag went to the battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel James Whittaker, West Point, class of 1991. 3 deployments. Ranger tab, Sapper tab, CIB with star. A serious man, a careful man, a man who read reports the way Ji-Yeon Holt read terrain, looking for the thing that didn't fit, the anomaly, the pattern break that signaled something important. Whittaker read the report. He read the range data. He read the designated marksman 7 times. And then he did what Kong knew he would do. He picked up the phone. He called Torres. He said 4 words. "Who made this shot?" Torres said, "Sergeant Holt, sir. Ji-Yeon Holt. 2nd Platoon's DM. Whittaker said, "Why isn't her name in the report?" Torres said, "You'd have to ask Lieutenant Dwyer, sir." Whittaker said, "I'm asking you, Captain." Torres said, and this is Torres telling me, 12 years later, his voice flat and careful the way officers' voices get when they're recounting conversations with superior officers. Torres said, "Sir, I believe the lieutenant has a bias against Sergeant Holt. I believe the omission was deliberate. I let the report go up because I believed you would catch it and address it at your level." Whittaker said, "You were right. I caught it. Send Dwyer to my office. Tomorrow, 0800. I don't know what happened in that office. I wasn't there. Dwyer won't talk to me. I tried 3 times through 3 different channels. He's a major now, still serving, stationed at Fort Liberty, the base formerly known as Bragg, the base where Ji-Yeon Holt grew up, the base where her mother served, the base where her great-uncle's name is on a memorial wall. Dwyer is there now. He didn't return my calls. He didn't respond to my emails. He didn't answer the letter I sent to his unit's mailing address. But I know what happened after the office. I know because the effects were visible. I know because Kong told me. I know because Torres told me. I know because the paperwork tells me. 3 things happened. First, the after-action report was amended. A corrected version was filed. Same 11 pages, same content, but with Sergeant Ji-Yeon Holt replacing the designated marksman in all 7 instances. The corrected version is the one I obtained through FOIA. The original, the one without her name, exists only in Kang's memory and Torres's memory, and, presumably, Dwyer's memory, though Dwyer's memory is not available to me. Second, Dwyer received a counseling statement. I don't have it. Counseling statements are not releasable under FOIA. They're personnel records, but Kong confirmed its existence. A written counseling from a battalion commander to a platoon leader is not a small thing. It's not a career ender, but it's a mark, a flag, a signal that says you did something wrong and someone above you noticed, and someone above you cared enough to document it. Third, Ji-Yeon Holt was put in for a Bronze Star with Valor Device. The recommendation was written by Torres, not Dwyer. Torres wrote it. Whitaker endorsed it. Brigade approved it. The citation reads, and I have this, it's public record. The citation reads, for exceptionally meritorious service in connection with combat operations against the enemy. Sergeant Holt's decisive action and extraordinary marksmanship under pressure directly prevented the destruction of a 12-soldier patrol element. Her engagement of an enemy mortar team at a range of 1,840 meters demonstrated technical mastery, tactical judgment, and personal courage of the highest order. 1,840 meters. Not approximately 1,800. The citation has the real number. The citation doesn't round down. The citation doesn't minimize. The citation says what happened, at the distance it happened, with the name of the person who made it happen. The award ceremony was at Patrol Base Karma. Small. The platoon. Torres flew in from the company headquarters. Whitaker was not present. He was at a different outpost that day. Torres pinned the medal. He shook her hand. He said, and Kong remembers this exactly, because Kong remembers everything exactly. Torres said, Sergeant Holt, this should have been in the first report. I'm sorry it wasn't. She said, thank you, sir. That was it. She didn't say more. She didn't say it's okay, or I understand, or no hard feelings. She said, thank you, sir, and she stepped back into formation, and the ceremony was over, and the platoon went back to work. Dwyer was present. He stood at the back of the formation. He didn't speak. He didn't approach her afterward. He didn't shake her hand. He didn't say good shot, or I was wrong, or I'm sorry I asked who gave you a rifle. He stood at the back and he watched, and then he walked to the operations center and he picked up the radio handset and he called in the afternoon patrol report, and the day continued as if nothing had happened. Because for Dwyer, nothing had happened, or rather, something had happened, but it had happened to him, not because of him. The counseling statement had happened to him. The amended report had happened to him. The award that he didn't write and didn't recommend and didn't endorse had happened to him. He was the object, not the subject. He was the one who'd been corrected, not the one who'd been wrong. There's a difference. The difference is accountability, and accountability requires the admission that the correction was deserved, and that admission requires the acknowledgement that the original action was a choice. And that acknowledgement leads to a place that Marcus Dwyer, 23 years old, West Point, Ranger Tab, Greenwich, Connecticut, was not prepared to go. The deployment continued. For more months, Holt made no other shots at that distance. She engaged targets on 6 more occasions, all within the M110's rated effective range. All confirmed kills or confirmed hits, all documented in after-action reports that included her name. Dwyer wrote those reports. He included her name. He included it the way you include a required field on a form, because it's required, because someone told you to, because the consequence of omitting it has been demonstrated, and you've learned to avoid the consequence without necessarily learning why the omission was wrong. They came home in March 2010. Fort Drum. The deployment was over. The platoon had lost no one. 0 Kia, 2 WIA, both returned to duty. By the metrics that the Army uses to measure success, 2nd Platoon's deployment was a success. By the metrics that Ji-Yeon Holt uses to measure success, whatever those metrics are, because she's never told anyone, I don't know. She served 2 more years. She deployed once more, back to Afghanistan, 2011 to 2012, a different province, a different platoon, a different lieutenant. This lieutenant, a 1st lieutenant named Caruso, who I spoke with briefly, Caruso told me that when Holt arrived at his platoon, he'd already heard about her. The NCO network, the story of a shot, the story of the report, the story of the name that wasn't there and then was. Caruso said he shook her hand on her first day and said, "Sergeant Holt, I've heard about you. I'm glad you're here." She said, "Thank you, sir. Where do you want me on patrol?" That's all she wanted. That's all she ever wanted. Where do you want me? What's the job? Point me at it. Let me work. Her second deployment was uneventful, by which I mean nobody tried to erase her from it. She did her job. She made shots. She came home. She was promoted to staff sergeant in 2012, a promotion that was, by all accounts, overdue. She should have been promoted a year earlier. The delay was, according to Kong, who sat on the promotion board, the delay was related to inconsistencies in her early evaluation reports. Inconsistencies, a word that means someone wrote something about her that didn't match what she actually did, and the board had to reconcile the discrepancy, and reconciling discrepancies takes time. She got out in 2013, 9 years of service, honorable discharge. She ETS'd at Fort Drum in January, the worst month to leave Fort Drum, the worst month to leave anywhere in upstate New York, the snow 3 feet deep and the temperature 15 below, and the sky the color of concrete. She packed her car, the same Honda Civic her father had rebuilt, now with 180,000 miles on it and a new transmission that Samuel Park had installed himself over Christmas leave, and she drove south, to Fayetteville, to the house on Bragg Boulevard where her father still lived, where her mother had lived until 2011, when Patricia Holt, Master Sergeant Rhett Patricia Holt, died of pancreatic cancer at the age of 54. Ji-Yeon moved back in her childhood bedroom. She was 28 years old. She had a Bronze Star with V. She had a combat action badge. She had 9 years of service and 4 deployments, and a shot that people still talked about in the 10th Mountain Division's NCO channels, and a name that had been erased from a report and then restored in a question, who gave her a rifle? That had been answered so completely and so permanently that the person who asked it would spend the rest of his career being reminded of the answer. She didn't talk about any of it. She got a job, a quiet job. She went to work for a company called Precision Analytics, a defense contractor in Fayetteville that does data analysis for military clients. She sits at a desk. She looks at screens. She analyzes patterns. She identifies anomalies. She does, in civilian clothes and in a climate-controlled office, exactly what she did in uniform and in the dust. She looks at information and she finds the thing that doesn't fit and she reports it to people who can act on it. She doesn't shoot competitively. I asked Kong about this, whether she still goes to the range, whether she still competes, whether she still does the thing that defined her for 9 years. Kong said, I asked her once. She said she doesn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. She said the rifle was never about proving something. It was about doing something. And she did it. She doesn't talk about the shot. She doesn't talk about Dwyer. She doesn't talk about the report or the missing name or the correction or the Bronze Star. Kong told me that in 10 years of friendship, they stayed close after the Army. They live 40 minutes apart. They have dinner once a month. In 10 years, she has mentioned a shot exactly twice. Once when Kong asked her directly, and once when she saw a news article about women in combat roles being officially authorized in 2015, 2 years after she got out, and she said, they're acting like this is new. That's all she said. They're acting like this is new. 5 words. The same number of words as who gave her a rifle. The same weight. The same density. The same ability to contain an entire history in a single sentence. I need to tell you about the student now. The ghost. I had a student at Quantico in 1997, officer candidate school. I was an instructor, not the senior instructor, not the commanding officer, just one of the staff, one of the Marines who ran the candidates through the course and evaluated them and decided collectively who would become officers and who would not. This student was a woman. I won't give you her name because she asked me not to years later when I told her I was writing these stories. She was 24. She was prior enlisted 4 years as a Marine, then selected for the officer program. She was smart. She was tough. She was the best shooter in her class. Not the best female shooter, the best shooter, period. She qualified expert with a score that would have been remarkable for a male candidate and was, for a female candidate in 1997, unprecedented. She didn't make it through OCS. Not because she failed, not because she couldn't do the work. She didn't make it because the system, that word again, the system in 1997 was not the system of 2009. The system in 1997 did not have a Kong, did not have a Torres, did not have a Whitaker who would pick up the phone and say, "Who made this shot?" The system in 1997 had gatekeepers who didn't want her there and who had the power to keep her out and who used that power without consequence because there was no one above them who would ask why. She was dropped from the program in week 8 of 10. The reason given was leadership deficiency. The specifics were vague. The paperwork was clean in the way that paperwork is clean when someone has taken care to make it clean, when someone has ensured that the words on the page cannot be challenged because the words are technically accurate, even if they are fundamentally dishonest. She went back to the fleet. She finished her enlistment. She got out. She went to college. She became a teacher, high school math, in a town in Virginia that I won't name. She's still there. She's 50 now. She has a family. She has a life. She doesn't talk about the Marine Corps. I think about her when I think about Ji-Yeon Holt. I think about the 12 years between them, 1997 to 2009, and what changed and what didn't. What changed? The policy, the paperwork, the official authorization, the doors that opened slowly, grudgingly, one at a time. What didn't change? The question. The question that every woman in uniform has heard in some form, in some voice, at some point in her service. The question that says, who authorized your presence? Who gave you permission? Who decided you belong here? Who gave her a rifle? The answer is, nobody gave her a rifle. She earned it. She qualified for it. She trained for it. She carried it. She fired it. She put a round through a man's chest at 1,840 meters and saved 12 lives, and the rifle was never given to her. It was hers. It was always hers. From a first day at the range with her mother, from the first 10 rounds inside the black circle, from the first, it was hers. Nobody gives you a rifle. You become the person who carries one, and then you carry it, and then you use it, and then someone writes a report about what you did and leaves your name out of it, and someone else reads the report and puts your name back in, and the rifle doesn't care about any of it. The rifle only knows what you did with it. The rifle only knows the math. The rifle only knows 1,840 meters and 2.7 seconds and 1 round and 1 kill and 12 lives. The rifle knows your name even when the report doesn't. Dwyer is a major now. I said that already. Fort Liberty, still serving, still climbing. The counseling statement from 2009 is buried in his personnel file. A single page in a stack of pages, a single mark in a career that has otherwise been successful by every metric the Army uses to measure success. He commands a company now. He has soldiers under him, men and women both, because it's 2024 and women serve in every MOS and every unit in every position, and a company commander who tried to write a female soldier out of an after-action report today would face consequences far more severe than a counseling statement. The world changed. The policy changed. The doors opened. But the question, who gave her a rifle? The question didn't disappear. It just got quieter. It moved from briefing rooms to break rooms, from official channels to unofficial ones, from things that lieutenants say out loud to things that lieutenants think and don't say because they've learned that saying them has consequences. But thinking them? Thinking them has no consequences. Thinking them is free. And the distance between thinking who gave her a rifle and writing a report that doesn't include her name, that distance is very short. That distance is the width of a pen stroke, the width of a keystroke, the width of the space between a name and its absence. Ji-Yeon Holt lives in Fayetteville, North Carolina. She goes to work. She comes home. She has dinner with her father, Samuel Park, now 72, still fixing things, still maintaining the house, still expressing love through acts of maintenance. She has dinner with Kong once a month, Korean food, always because Kong insists and because the food reminds them both of something they can't quite name. She doesn't go to the range. She doesn't talk about the army. She doesn't talk about the shot. But in her apartment, a one-bedroom on Skibbo Road, 3 miles from Fort Liberty's main gate, in her apartment, on a shelf in the living room, there is a shadow box. Not the kind the Army gives you at retirement. She didn't retire. She ETS'd. There was no ceremony. This one she made herself. Or rather, her father made it. Samuel Park built it in his garage, measured the wood, cut the glass, lined the interior with black velvet. Inside the shadow box, there are 3 items. Her Bronze Star with V device. The medal itself, bronze, 5-pointed, with the small bronze V that signifies valor, that signifies the award was earned under fire, that signifies the thing she did was not administrative or meritorious, but was done in the presence of the enemy with the enemy trying to kill her, and her trying to kill the enemy, and her succeeding. A single brass casing. 7.62x 51 mm NATO. Fired. The casing from the round she sent 1,840 meters across a valley in Helmand Province on October 23, 2009. She kept it. She picked it up from the dirt beside her position after the patrol returned to base. She put it in her pocket. She carried it home. It sits in the shadow box now, small, brass, unremarkable. A piece of metal that weighs less than an ounce and that contains, in its emptiness, the entire weight of what she did. And a piece of paper, a photocopy, not the original. The original is in her personnel file at the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis. A photocopy of page 7 of the corrected after-action report. The page where her name appears for the first time. Sergeant Ji-Yeon Holt, designated marksman, engaged 1 enemy combatant at 1,840 meters. The sentence is highlighted in yellow. The highlighting is hers. She highlighted it herself with a yellow highlighter the day she received the corrected copy. The day her name came back. That's what's in the shadow box. A medal, a casing, a name. Her father built the box. He didn't ask what the items meant. He didn't ask about the shot or the report or the lieutenant or the 42 days. He measured the wood. He cut the glass. He lined the interior with velvet. He handed it to his daughter. She put the items inside. She put the box on the shelf. They didn't discuss it. That's not what Parks do. That's not what Holts do. They build things. They maintain things. They fix things. They don't explain them. I want to tell you one more thing, and then I'll let you go. Kong told me that in 2019, 10 years after the shot, He and Holt were at dinner. Korean restaurant. Soju. The conversation had wandered, the way conversations wander after the second bottle, through topics that sober people don't touch, regrets, decisions, the things you'd do differently if you could go back. Kong asked her, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if Whitaker hadn't caught it? If the report had stayed the way it was?" She was quiet for a long time. Kong said she turned her soju glass in her fingers, rotating it slowly, the way she rotates the windage turret on a scope. Precise, deliberate, measured. Then she said, "The shot still happened. Whether my name is on the paper or not, the shot still happened. Those 12 guys still went home. The math doesn't change because someone leaves your name off a form." Kong said, "But doesn't it bother you that he tried to erase you?" She said, "He didn't erase me. He erased himself. He erased his own credibility. He erased his own integrity. I'm still here. The shot is still mine. The casing is still on my shelf. He can't take that. Nobody can take that. You can take a name off a page. You can't take a bullet out of the air. You can't take a bullet out of the air. I wrote that down. I carry it. The way I carry everything these women tell me. In the space between my ribs, in the place where the things that matter live, in the quiet archive of an old man's memory that is running out of room, but will never run out of space for this. You can't take a bullet out of the air. Once it's fired, it's fired. Once it flies, it flies. Once it arrives, 2.7 seconds later, 1,840 meters away, through wind and heat and gravity and the rotation of the Earth, once it arrives, it has arrived. No report can unfire it. No omission can uncall it. No lieutenant with a pen and a bias and a picture in his head can reach back through time and space and pull that bullet back into the barrel and pretend it never left. It left. It flew. It arrived. She fired it. Sergeant Ji-Yeon Holt, United States Army. Infantryman. Designated marksman. Korean American. Out of Fayetteville, North Carolina. The part with the pawn shops and the tattoo parlors and the check cashing places and the memorial walls and the mothers who serve and the daughters who follow and the rifles that belong to the people who carry them, regardless of what any report says or doesn't say. 1,840 meters. One round. 12 lives. Her name is in the report now. It's been in the report since November 2009. It will be in the report forever. And even if someone took it out again, even if every copy were destroyed, every file deleted, every record erased, the shot would still be hers. The math would still be hers. The 2.7 seconds would still be hers. You can't take a bullet out of the air. My student at Quantico, the one from 1997, the one who didn't make it through, she sent me a message last year. Short, 3 sentences. She said, "I read about the women in Rangers now. I read about the women in infantry. I'm glad the door opened. I just wish I hadn't been the one they closed it on." I didn't know what to say to her. I still don't. I don't know what you say to someone who was right before the world was ready for them to be right. I don't know what you say to someone who could shoot and couldn't stay. I don't know what you say to someone whose name was never in a report because there was never a report to put it in, because the thing she could have done was never allowed to happen, and the shot she could have made was never fired, and the bullet that could have been hers stayed in the magazine, and the magazine stayed in the ammo can, and the ammo can stayed in the arms room, and the arms room stayed locked. I don't know what you say. So I said, "I'm sorry. You deserve better. The Corps failed you." She said, "I know, but I'm glad someone's telling the stories now, even if mine isn't one of them. It is now. It's here. It's part of this. Not the main story. Ji-Yeon's story is the main story. But the ghost story, the shadow, the woman who came before and who made the path possible by walking it first and being turned back and surviving the turning back and going on to live a life that doesn't include the Marine Corps, but that the Marine Corps should include in its memory. Should, doesn't, but should. If you serve with someone like her, someone quiet, someone precise, someone whose name was left off a report or a roster or a recommendation, the comments are open. Not for me. For the record. The record is what we make it. The record is what we insist on. The record is the difference between the designated marksman and Sergeant Ji-Yeon Holt. The record is a name. The record is a correction. The record is a battalion commander picking up a phone and saying 4 words. Who made this shot? Someone made the shot. Someone always makes the shot. And a shot deserves a name. That's the record now. You're part of it. So am I.